Welcome back. Thanks for staying with us. Can South Africans protect themselves from crime through technology? Now, safety and security remains a massive issue in South Africa. In his latest crime statistics, Police Minister Bheki Cele revealed that the country has experienced a massive jump in hijacking activity since pre-COVID times. Well, to give us some perspective, I'm joined by Cliff de Wit, Chief Technology Officer at Netstar. Very good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for your time. Welcome to Newzroom Afrika. What are some of the most common types of ransom and extortion crimes currently taking place in South Africa, and what are the main ways in which these crimes are being perpetrated?
Hi, Paul. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I mean, the data is really interesting when you unpack it, right? So I think the things that we took certainly from the report was that hijackings were up by 30% from the previous year. Specifically, carjackings up 2.8, which is not as much as I guess we would have thought. But we're also seeing a huge trend in truck hijackings, up almost 10%, 9.8%, which shows that there is value in sort of cargo and fleet, and that criminals are certainly targeting that. The other interesting thing from the stats is that if you look at the provincial breakdown, Gauteng almost accounts for 50% of that across the country at 47%, and second there, KwaZulu-Natal at only 18%. So you can see Gauteng has a huge, much bigger impact than the rest of the country.
Yeah. No, carry on.
Yes, so I guess to come to your question, we are really seeing a sort of a trend. And if we look at our own numbers, over our last year, so from January to December, we noticed that we had sort of almost 2,500 thefts, just classic vehicle thefts, but contrasted to that, almost 3,500 hijackings. So I guess the trend is really that criminals are targeting more live vehicles, more hijackings rather than the classic sort of robbery scenario. And then, of course, we've all seen the media spilling out into hijackings that relate into some type of extortion or some type of ransom taking place.
Mm-hmm. So how can technology then be used to protect individuals and organizations from extortion crimes and ransom, and perhaps also what specific tools or software solutions are available to help mitigate these risks?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we are in some ways fortunate to be living in this world where we all reasonably well connected, either through mobile phones, through PCs, et cetera, and we are seeing how that technology is helping us prevent some of this. So I guess the two parts of this are sort of how do I figure out where you are, firstly, and then secondly, if I need help, can I get a message to somebody that can help? And we've been experimenting for a while. We have a really nice app now called Companion that allows you to push a button on a mobile phone and then get help, or at least get a phone call to ascertain whether you get help, whether you need help. And we find through our statistics and looking at data, if you can figure out that somebody needs help quickly, in other words, if you can react very, very fast, the chance to mitigate something bad happening goes up almost exponentially. So a lot of focus of what we have with our technology is A, to make sure we know where you are, and B, to make sure that we understand how to get hold of you and ascertain whether you need help. And those are really the primary factors that sort of help you. I think we're all kind of thinking around mobile phones and mobile phones being that interface, and there's numerous sort of personal safety apps. But of course, past the app, we also think about, what is the reaction? So when you do need help, how do we make sure that help gets there? And some of our efforts that are proving to be very fruitful right now is sort of partnering with communities, partnering with other security companies, so that, again, we can make sure that if somebody needs help, the time for when you ask for help to when you get it is as quick as possible. And those are really, really the drivers that we're seeing that help people in terms of protecting themselves.
Yeah. And in your opinion, looking at some of the most effective strategies that people can use to protect themselves and their loved ones, even if they don't have access to the latest technology, how then do you navigate around it? I mean, I know you've just mentioned communities, but how do you make sure that there is that reach and that instant assistance?
Yeah, it's a great point, and I think we would have seen the Gauteng Premier make an announcement a week or so ago where Mr. Masupi mentioned that they were going to use the SAPS reach to create a panic button. So I think that's certainly one example of sort of the reach extending out into larger community. We also see technology playing a part here. So as you rightly said, mobile phones are not in everybody's hands. They tend to be costly, and not everybody has connectivity. And we are seeing technology become much, much better and much, much more available. So we're also working on making devices where it's as simple like a little push button that will cost very little amount of money, obviously paid to a service that will help people and increase the reach. So I think there is a mixture sort of in terms of partnering with larger forums, and SAPS is certainly one of those, but also I think the technology will make it a lot more accessible. Over and above that, I think there's just some sort of tips that we have that they just are good hygiene tips, right? So just how do you prevent something happening in the first place? A lot of our data shows that incidents tend to happen when people are either leaving or entering their homes or their premises. And it's often, when your guard is down, you probably, after a long day's work, you either commuted on public transport or you're in your own car. And that's often when you're sort of at your calmest, when you just subconsciously navigate home. And that's often when criminals pounce on you because your guard is not typically up there. So maybe one tip there is just be vigilant, specifically around your place of residence. The other thing that we do notice is that around sort of really busy areas, we also tend to note some hotspots. So at airports, at larger shopping malls, we also tend to notice that. And again, I think people are not vigilant in those areas. Another thing about vehicles that we notice is that, there's increasing sort of technology involved in stealing certainly vehicles and trucks. So make sure that you lock your vehicle if you do leave it. Tug on the handle just to make sure that it's actually locked. Often there's these things called jamming alerts that people perpetrate where you think you've locked your vehicle and you haven't. And then also one other disturbing trend that we've noticed is that certainly some of the criminal networks are starting to target some of our ride-sharing providers, so like Uber or Taxify or Bolt, where some of those guys are sitting on the side of the road and they make easy pickings for some of the syndicates. So those are some of the tips that we've picked up just in terms of the trends that we're seeing.
With the trends, what role do you think that government and law enforcement agencies should be playing in addressing these rising trends, and how can they work with the private sector to tackle these crimes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think we certainly engage deeply with the police services and government because it's a national challenge, obviously not something we see as an individual challenge. So I do think some of the announcements made by government and certainly acknowledging that there is a problem is a very important first step. I do believe that it's not in anybody's single hands to solve this. So I think as we do, we think that we should all participate, and I think communities getting together to solve these problems is really, really important because it really only gets solved when multiple parties start activating it.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I do believe that an interesting thing that we see is how do you really get to the person that actually needs the help? I think anybody who's had a home alarm or anybody who's had some type of call for help type function has probably hit it accidentally 99 more times than they've actually needed to when they need help, right? And so one thing we've noticed with the work that we've done, and we're certainly going to be sharing this with larger communities, is how to figure out which are in that sort of sea of calls for help, which is the one that actually is a requirement. And this is where, technologies like machine learning, also artificial intelligence come into play, where we can start looking at the actual individual fingerprint of individuals and say, that something looks strange over there. That person never enters that area. And now they've pushed the panic button at that point in time. That's probably a higher priority than somebody who just happens to be at home and pushing the panic button. So I think it's a mixture of community involvement plus technology really start helping us start crack this issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Some great advice there. Thanks for your time. Cliff de Wit, Chief Technology Officer at Netstar, speaking there to how South Africans can protect themselves from crime through technology.